A German shepherd trapped in a raging flood, his paws slipping, his body trembling, fighting for his life. The water kept rising. Hope was fading until a shadow appeared in the distance. Someone was coming, but was it already too late? This is a story of courage, survival, and an unbreakable bond that will leave you breathless. The storm had been brewing for hours, but no one had expected it to turn into a catastrophe. The dark clouds had rolled in fast, covering the sky like an ominous blanket. Thunder cracked through the air, shaking the ground beneath it. Rain poured in endless sheets, hammering against rooftops, streets, and open fields, turning everything into a murky, chaotic mess. The river that ran along the small town had swollen beyond its banks, consuming everything in its path: trees, fences, even parked cars. Nothing could resist the force of the water. The current was vicious, sweeping away anything that stood in its way. In the middle of it all, Max, a strong and fiercely loyal German shepherd, fought for his life. He had never faced anything like this before. Just hours ago, he had been in the backyard of his owner's house, watching the sky darken as the first drops of rain began to fall. Then, suddenly everything had changed. The water had risen faster than anyone could react. His instincts had screamed at him to run, to find higher ground, but it was too late. The fence had collapsed behind him. The backyard had turned into a swirling pool of muddy water. In a panic, Max had tried to leap onto the porch, but the force of the flood had been too strong, knocking him off balance. In seconds, he was being carried away, tumbling and twisting in the raging current. Now he was alone, fighting against the relentless flood. His paws scraped desperately against submerged debris, searching for something, anything, to hold on to. The water was freezing, and every muscle in his body burned from the struggle. His lungs heaved as he gasped for air. His ears pinned back against his soaked fur. The rain blinded him, making it impossible to see where he was going. Each time he tried to push himself forward, another wave knocked him back, threatening to drag him under. Then his body slammed against something solid, a broken wooden fence, half submerged in the water. Max scrambled, digging his claws into the slippery wood, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull himself up. For a moment, he stayed there, panting heavily, his body shivering from exhaustion. The water still roared beneath him, crashing against the fence, trying to pry him away. But Max held on. He let out a weak bark, his voice barely audible over the storm. His ears twitched, straining to hear anything besides the howling wind and the furious river. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no sign of his owner. His heart pounded. Was he truly alone? Had everyone been forced to evacuate, leaving him behind? Another crack of thunder rumbled through the air, followed by a gust of wind that nearly knocked him off his perch. Max let out another desperate bark, but the storm swallowed it whole. Then a sound. At first, it was barely noticeable against the storm's fury, but then it grew louder. Footsteps rushing, splashing through the water. Someone was coming. Max's ears perked up, his eyes scanning the darkness. A figure appeared in the distance, moving against the flood. But who was it? And more importantly, were they too late? The storm showed no mercy. The wind howled through the trees, bending them until they nearly snapped. The floodwaters churned with an unstoppable force, devouring everything in their path. The sky, once a deep shade of blue, had turned an inky black, illuminated only by brief flashes of lightning that tore across the heavens. Max's paws trembled against the slick wood beneath him. His muscles ached. His body froze from the relentless downpour. His ears twitched at the sound of footsteps splashing through the water, growing louder with each second. Someone was out there. His heart pounded in his chest as he forced his tired body to stay alert through the rain and darkness. A silhouette emerged, moving fast, pushing against the current with determination. The figure was human, their form partially obscured by the storm. They carried flashlight, its beam slicing through the rain in frantic sweeps. "Hold on, boy," a voice called out. Max's ears perked up. He recognized that voice. It was Ethan, the firefighter who often visited his owner's house. He had played with Max before, tossing a ball in the yard, rubbing his ears, always calling him a good boy. But now Ethan wasn't smiling. He was drenched, fighting against the flood, his face tense with urgency. Max let out a bark, his strongest one yet. "I see you," Ethan shouted, pushing forward. The water was waist-deep, the current pulling against him like invisible hands trying to drag him down. He struggled to keep his footing, his boots slipping on the submerged ground. Each step was a battle. Max shifted his weight, his paws barely gripping the wooden fence that had become his fragile lifeline. The fence groaned under the pressure of the water, creaking and bending. If it broke apart, he would be swept away again. Ethan reached the edge of the wreckage and stretched out a hand. "Come on, buddy. I've got you." But Max couldn't move. His legs were locked in place, frozen by exhaustion and fear. He had been fighting for so long, barely keeping his head above water. His instincts screamed at him to trust Ethan, to make the jump, but the river was too strong. Ethan took another step forward. The water surged around him, nearly knocking him over. He gritted his teeth, pushing forward despite the risk. "Come on, Max," he urged again, his hand reaching as far as it could. "You have to jump. I won't let go." Max whimpered. His body felt heavy, drained to strength. But something in Ethan's voice, the unwavering confidence, the promise, ignited something deep inside him, summoning the last of his energy. Max crouched low, tensing his muscles. He leaped. For a split second, time slowed. His body soared through the air, his soaked fur glistening under a flash of lightning. Ethan lunged forward, arms outstretched. Their bodies collided. Ethan caught Max midair, his hands gripping the dog's wet fur, but the force of the jump combined with a powerful current sent them both tumbling backward into the flood. The world spun. Water rushed over them. Max gasped as he plunged into the freezing depths, his limbs thrashing. He felt Ethan's grip tighten around him, pulling him upward, fighting against the river's merciless grip. They broke the surface with a desperate gasp. Ethan held onto Max with one arm while the other fought to keep them both afloat. The current pulled them downstream, sending them crashing into debris. "We're not done yet, buddy," Ethan panted, his arms burning with effort. A few meters ahead, the remains of a partially submerged truck jutted out from the water. It was their only chance. Kicking against the current, Ethan steered them toward it, gritting his teeth as another wave slammed into them. He could feel Max struggling, his body shaking, but the dog refused to give up. With one final push, they reached the truck. Ethan grabbed onto the side mirror, holding on for dear life as the flood raged around them. Max clawed his way up onto the hood, collapsing from exhaustion. For a moment, they just breathed. Ethan glanced around, his mind racing. The water was still rising. They were still trapped. And the worst part, the truck was starting to move. Ethan's stomach twisted. The current was too strong. The truck wasn't stable. It could be swept away at any moment. Max lifted his head, his tired eyes locking onto Ethan's. They weren't safe yet, and they were running out of time. The storm was relentless. The sky, a chaotic swirl of black and gray, rumbled with fury as lightning slashed across the horizon. Sheets of rain continued to hammer down, merging with the deafening roar of the flood. Ethan's fingers dug into the truck's side mirror, his knuckles white from the strain. His breath was heavy, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he fought against exhaustion. The water was up to his shoulders now, swirling violently around him, trying to pry him away from the only thing keeping him alive. Above him, Max lay sprawled across the hood of the truck, his soaked fur clinging to his trembling body. His breaths were shallow, his ears flattened against his head. His muscles burned from the endless struggle, but he refused to close his eyes. They had made it this far, but for how much longer? Ethan tilted his head back, scanning the area. The town was almost unrecognizable beneath the flood. Houses stood partially submerged, their rooftops barely peeking above the water. Debris, wooden planks, trash cans, even furniture, drifted past them, swept away by the raging current. Then his worst fear became reality. The truck shifted. It was subtle at first, a slight tilt, a faint groan of metal under stress. But Ethan felt it. The current was pulling the vehicle inch by inch, dragging it into the deeper part of the flood. His pulse spiked. "Max," Ethan shouted, gripping the truck with everything he had. "We have to move now." Max lifted his head, his eyes filled with exhaustion. But when he saw fear in Ethan's face, his body tensed. The truck gave another lurch. The water swirled around the tires, lifting them from the ground. It was about to be carried away. Ethan's mind raced. They needed something, anything, to hold on to before they were swept even further into the flood. Then he saw it about 50 feet away. A streetlight pole still stood, its base partially submerged. It was their only chance. If they could reach it, they could climb to safety. But they had to jump. And they had to jump now. Ethan turned back to Max. "Listen to me, buddy," he said. His voice steadied despite the panic inside him. "I need you to jump with me, okay? We're going to swim to that pole. You got this." Max stared at him, his ears twitching. Then, as if understanding, he pushed himself up. The truck let out a deep metallic groan. It was moving. "Go," Ethan yelled. Max leaped. His legs, though weak, propelled him forward, straight into the freezing current. His head barely stayed above water as the river's force tried to drag him down. Ethan launched himself after him, his arms slicing through the water. The moment he hit the current, it felt like 1,000 invisible hands grabbed him, pulling him in every direction. His limbs burned as he fought against it, pushing toward Max, pushing toward survival. Max was ahead of him, paddling with everything he had, his eyes locked onto the streetlight pole. Ethan gritted his teeth. He could barely keep his head up, but he had to reach Max. Then the unthinkable happened. A massive wave of debris came crashing down the river. A fallen tree. Ethan's eyes widened. "Max, watch out." But it was too late. The tree slammed into Max. The impact sent him spinning underwater. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. "Max," he roared. He dove. The water swallowed him whole. The world turned dark and silent. His eyes burned, searching frantically. Max was there, struggling against the force of the current, his paws flailing as he tried to break free from the tangled branches. Ethan kicked forward, ignoring the fire in his lungs. His hand shot out, grabbing Max's collar with all his strength. He yanked him free. They broke the surface with a desperate gasp. Max coughed, spitting out water, but he was still moving. The streetlight pole was 10 feet away, almost there. Ethan panted, pushing them forward. His muscles screamed for relief, but he refused to stop. One last stroke, one last kick. His fingers closed around the pole. He pulled himself up, then grabbed Max, hoisting him onto the base. They had made it. Ethan collapsed against the pole, his body shaking, his breath ragged. Max slumped beside him, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The storm raged on around them. The floodwaters still churned below, but they were safe for now. Ethan let his head fall back, closing his eyes for a moment. Then he turned to Max. "One hell of a fighter, buddy," he murmured. Max, still trembling, lifted his head and licked Ethan's face. Despite everything, despite the cold, the exhaustion, the terror, Ethan let out a weak chuckle. They weren't out of danger yet, but they were alive. And as long as they were together, they still had a chance. His paws trembled, his breath uneven. He had been fighting for hours. Ethan placed a hand on Max's damp coat. "Hang in there, buddy," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Max's ears twitched slightly in response, but he didn't move much. Ethan clenched his jaw. They had made it this far, but the floodwaters were still rising. If they didn't find a way out soon, their refuge would be underwater. He glanced around, searching for any sign of rescue. The town was unrecognizable, submerged in a swirling ocean of destruction. Buildings stood like half-sunken tombstones, their windows shattered, doors ripped off their hinges. There were no sirens, no helicopters, no boats navigating through the wreckage. They were completely alone. A wave of cold dread settled in Ethan's chest. They couldn't wait for help. If they stayed here much longer, they would either drown or get swept away again. They had to move. Ethan turned to Max. "We're getting out of here," he said, his voice filled with determination. Max barely lifted his head. His body was drained, his strength nearly gone. Ethan exhaled sharply. He had to think fast. They needed higher ground, something above the floodwaters. Then, through the pouring rain, he spotted it, a rooftop about 30 yards away. The remains of a hardware store stood, its upper level barely above the flood. If they could get to it, they'd have a real chance of survival. Ethan's stomach twisted. 30 yards in calm waters would have been an easy swim, but in this, the current was still vicious, pulling everything under. It was a gamble, but they had no other choice. He turned to Max, placing a firm hand on his soak fur. "I need you to trust me, okay?" Max's eyes, though exhausted, locked onto Ethan's. There was no hesitation, no fear, just trust. Ethan gave a nod. "All right, we're doing this." He wrapped an arm tightly around Max's torso. Then, with a deep breath, he jumped. The cold hit him like a punch to the chest. The flood swallowed them whole, dragging them down into the abyss. Ethan kicked desperately, fighting his way back to the surface. His arm tightened around Max, holding him above the water. The current was stronger than before, pushing against them, trying to pull them away. But Ethan refused to let go. He kicked harder, gritting his teeth against the pain, forcing himself forward. Every stroke felt like lifting bricks. His body screamed for relief, but he wouldn't stop. Not now, not when they were so close. Max, despite his exhaustion, paddled weakly alongside him, his instincts kicking in. The two of them fought together, side by side, against the impossible. The rooftop loomed ahead, 10 yards, 5 yards, almost there. Then, without warning, something slammed into them. A piece of floating debris, a wooden pallet, spinning in the current like a weapon. It hit Ethan's side with full force. Pain exploded through his ribs. His grip on Max slipped. He gasped, his body going numb for a split second. And in that moment, Max was pulled away. "No," Ethan roared, his heart stopping. He twisted, reaching for Max, but the river had already separated them. Max tumbled deeper into the flood, disappearing beneath the waves. Ethan's blood ran cold. He had lost him. No, no, no. Rage ignited inside him, overriding his pain with one final desperate surge of strength. Ethan lunged forward, fighting the water with everything he had. He dove. Darkness swallowed him. The river was endless, swirling chaotic. His lungs burned. His eyes stung. But he didn't stop. He wouldn't lose Max, not like this. Then, through the murky water, he saw him. Max was there, struggling against the current, his paws barely moving. He was drowning. Ethan reached out. His fingers closed around Max's collar. And with every last ounce of strength, he pulled them up. They burst through the surface, gasping for air. The rooftop was right in front of them. Summoning the last of his strength, Ethan kicked toward it, dragging Max with him. His hands grasped the edge of the building. His muscles burned. His body screamed, but he lifted Max first, pushing the dog onto the rooftop. Then, with a final push, he climbed up after him. They collapsed together, side by side, on solid ground. The storm still raged around them. The flood still surged below, but they had made it. They had survived. Ethan turned his head toward Max, barely able to breathe. Max, drenched and trembling, looked back at him. And then, slowly, his tail wagged. Ethan let out a breathless laugh. They weren't out of danger yet, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. They had won this battle, and together, they would make it through the rest. The storm still raged on, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Ethan and Max had solid ground beneath them. The rooftop was small, barely wide enough to hold them both. The hardware store beneath them was still partially submerged, the floodwater swirling angrily below, consuming everything in their path. Ethan lay flat on his back, his chest heaving. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest. Besides him, Max trembled violently. His soaked fur clung to his thin frame. His breaths were uneven, but he was alive. And that was all that mattered. Ethan turned his head, reaching out to run his fingers through Max's drenched fur. "We did it, buddy," he murmured. "We made it." Max let out a weak whimper, his tail twitching ever so slightly. Ethan smiled, despite the pain radiating through his body. For a moment, He allowed himself to believe they were safe. But then a sound, a deep, metallic groan. Ethan's stomach dropped. The building shuddered beneath them. No, Ethan breathed, pushing himself up. The rooftop lurched. The hardware store was collapsing. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. They had seconds, maybe less. "Max, move," he yelled. But before he could react, the roof gave way. Ethan and Max plummeted. The world spun into chaos. Ethan barely had time to register the feeling of weightlessness before his back slammed into debris. Pain exploded through his body. His vision blurred from the impact. Somewhere in the darkness, he heard Max yelp. "Max!" Ethan shouted, his voice raw with panic. A second later, water engulfed him. Cold, unrelenting, suffocating. Ethan's lungs burned as he twisted, kicking upward, fighting against the wreckage and the swinging flood. His fingers clawed through the darkness, desperately searching. Then fur. His hand closed around Max's collar. Ethan kicked, using every ounce of strength left in his battered body. They broke the surface with a desperate gasp. The store had collapsed around them, its walls crumbling into the flood. Debris floated everywhere. Chunks of metal, shattered glass, broken shelves. The water was still rising. Ethan coughed, forcing air back into his burning lungs. "We're not done yet, buddy," he panted, pulling Max close. They had to find higher ground again. Ethan scanned the area, his vision hazy, his thoughts racing. Then, through the darkness, he saw it, a water tower. It stood just beyond the ruins, its ladder still intact, rising high above the flood. It was their only chance. Ethan's grip on Max tightened. "One last push, boy. We can do this." Max was exhausted, his body barely responding. But when Ethan kicked forward, Max followed, his instincts refusing to give up. Stroke by stroke, they fought against the current. The water tower grew closer, 20 feet, 10 feet, almost there. Then a shadow moved in the water. Ethan's breath hitched. Something big was floating toward them. His blood ran cold, a power line. The flood had ripped down electrical poles, their cables still attached, live wires sparking as they drifted through the water. And one was heading right for them. Ethan's mind screamed for a solution. If the power line touched the water, if the current carried it too close, it would be over. No time, no second chances, just one move. Ethan sucked in a sharp breath. "Max, go." With a final desperate burst of strength, he shoved Max forward. The German Shepherd let out a startled yelp as he was propelled toward the water tower's ladder, just as the power line slammed into the flood behind them. The world erupted in sparks, a flash of white-hot light. The water sizzled like fire meeting ice. Pain shot through Ethan's body like 1,000 knives, tearing him apart all at once. And then darkness. Ethan's body went limp. Max, now clinging to the ladder, turned his dark eyes locking onto his human. Ethan was floating, unmoving, the flood carrying him away. Max's ears pinned back. He was safe. He had made it. But Ethan wasn't moving. The dog's chest heaved. Lightning flashed overhead. Max's gaze shifted from the ladder, his only refuge, to the man drifting away. Then, despite everything, despite the exhaustion, Max let go. With a powerful push, he launched himself back into the flood and swam after Ethan. The flood was merciless. The moment Max let go of the ladder, the current seized him, pulling him down, dragging him toward the chaos that had already swallowed Ethan. But Max didn't stop. His paws sliced through the freezing water, paddling harder than ever before. His chest burned with exhaustion, his legs screaming for relief, but he refused to slow down. Ethan was out there, and Max would not lose him. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the destruction. The flood raged around them, carrying debris, twisted metal, shattered wood, broken signs. But Max weaved through it all, his instincts pushing him forward. Then he saw him. Ethan's lifeless body drifted in the current, his face barely above the water, his arms limp. Max's heart pounded. A deep, primal instinct took over. He lunged forward, biting down on Ethan's jacket with everything he had. His powerful jaws locked tight, refusing to let go. Ethan didn't move, but Max wouldn't accept that. With a fierce pull, he began to drag Ethan through the water. The current fought back, trying to tear them apart, but Max fought harder. Every muscle burned, his lungs screamed, but he did not stop. The water tower was still in sight, its ladder just out of reach. Max's body was giving out. He had nothing left, but he had to keep going. He kicked harder. Another surge forward, 5 feet, 3 feet, almost there. Then, with a final effort, his teeth caught the ladder. With the last ounce of strength in his body, he bit down and held on. His paws scrambled against Ethan's jacket, trying to push him up onto the ladder. But Ethan was still unmoving. Max let out a weak, desperate whimper. Then, a gasp, Ethan's body lurched. He coughed, spitting out water. His eyes flew open in shock. His body shuddered violently as he sucked in deep, ragged breaths. He was alive, and Max had saved him. Ethan blinked in dazed confusion, struggling to make sense of where he was. His arms were weak, his head spinning. Then he felt something warm pressed against him. He turned his gaze, locking onto Max. The German Shepherd was shaking violently, his body barely holding on. His jaws still clenched around Ethan's jacket. Ethan's eyes widened. Max. His voice broke. Realization hit him like a tidal wave. Max had saved his life. Through unimaginable exhaustion, through pain, through pure will. Ethan's heart clenched, but they weren't safe yet. Gritting his teeth, he forced his numb arms to move. He grabbed Max, lifting him onto the ladder first. Max didn't resist. He couldn't. He had given everything he had. With one final push, Ethan climbed up after him, pulling them both onto the metal platform. They collapsed together, soaked, shivering, barely breathing, but alive. For a long time, they just lay there, side by side, staring up at the raging sky. The flood still churned below. The storm still raged above. But up here, they had found solid ground. Ethan slowly turned his head, his throat tight with emotion. Max lay beside him, his sides rising and falling in weak, uneven breaths. Ethan reached out, running a trembling hand over his fur. "You saved me, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it." Max let out a soft, exhausted whimper. Ethan swallowed hard, blinking away the stinging in his eyes. Then, for the first time in hours, the rain began to slow. The winds eased. The storm's fury began to fade. And, in the distance, the sound of helicopters. Ethan lifted his head, his heart pounding with hope. Flashing lights cut through the fading storm. A rescue team was finally arriving. He turned to Max, his fingers tightening in the dog's fur. "We made it," he murmured. And as if understanding, Max's tail gave a weak wag. They had fought. They had survived. And now they were going home. As the rescue team approached, Ethan let out a deep breath, his gaze never leaving Max. He had always known that German Shepherds were strong, but tonight he had witnessed something else, a heart bigger than fear, a courage deeper than the flood, and a loyalty that would never, ever break.